The story of how an almost forgotten song rescued one of pop music's most legendary groups from the abyss, and, in a twist of fate, turned them into cultural phenomena in a continent they didn't even have on their radar, is one of those musical paradoxes that deserves to be told in great detail. Before you start this video, remember to subscribe and like it. It all began in the Polar Music Studios in Stockholm, where ABBA's creative environment was going through one of its most tense moments. It was 1975, and although externally, the Swedish quartet was still racking up hits with songs like Mamma Mia and SOS, internally the cracks were beginning to show. Complicated personal dynamics, with 2 marriages between the members falling apart in the midst of endless touring and recording sessions, threatened to destroy the musical magic that had brought them to the top. Benny Andersson and Björn Ulvaeus, the band's songwriters, were feeling the pressure to maintain the level of creativity that the public expected, while Agnetha Fältskog and Anni-Frid Lyngstad were trying to balance their personal lives in crisis with the demands of being the most recognizable female voices in European pop. In the midst of this rarefied climate, something peculiar happened. Anni-Frid, or Frida as she was known to fans, had months earlier recorded a song in Swedish entitled Min älskling, My Love, for a solo album. It was a simple ballad with a pleasant melody, but one that didn't seem destined for greater glories. The original lyrics, written by lyricist Stig Andersson, spoke vaguely about love and nostalgia, inspired in part by stories Frida had heard about the Mexican Revolution, albeit in a very tangential way. The song went relatively unnoticed in its Swedish version, but it contained in its musical structure a potential that Benny, with his expert ear, knew how to recognize immediately. It was during one of those long nights in the studio, when fatigue and frustration at not finding the hit they needed for their next album were beginning to weigh in, that Benny listened to the Min älskling demo again. Something about that tune, perhaps the melancholy inherent in the acoustic guitar chords and piano, or the way Frida's voice conveyed such genuine emotion, made him think that there was material there for something much bigger. Together with Björn, they decided to completely rewrite the song. They changed the lyrics to more universal English, added those iconic accordion arrangements that would give it its signature sound, and transformed what was a simple ballad into an epic reflection on friendship, war, and the passing of time. When they finally recorded the final version of Fernando, there was a magical moment in the studio where everyone knew they had created something special. Agnetha, who did not participate as lead vocalist on this song, would recall years later how her skin crawled when she heard Frida sing the chorus for the first time. "If I had to do the same again, I would, my friend, Fernando." It was as if all the tension and emotions that had built up in the group during those difficult months had found an outlet in that performance. The release of Fernando as a single in March 1976 was received with enthusiasm in Europe, reaching #1 in more than 10 countries. But nothing compared to the phenomenon it would unleash months later when it reached Latin America. Something about that song resonated deeply with Latin audiences in a way that no one, not even Stig Andersson himself, the group's manager known for his commercial instincts, could have anticipated. If you are liking the video, remember to subscribe and leave your like. In Argentina, where the political climate was especially tense under the military government, Fernando became an unofficial anthem. People heard echoes of their own losses and resistance in its lyrics. Radio stations reported massive requests for the song, to the point that some programmed it every hour. In Mexico, the connection was even more organic. The mariachi mix implicit in the accordion arrangements made the song sound surprisingly familiar, as if it had always belonged to the country's popular songbook. It was not uncommon to hear street versions with trumpets and guitars that completely transformed the original arrangement, while maintaining that melancholic essence that made it so special. The impact in the rest of Latin America was equally profound. In Colombia, it became an obligatory theme at parties and family gatherings. In Chile, it was constantly played on the radio during the hardest years of the dictatorship. In Venezuela, the stations played it as the emotional closure of their nightly programming. ABBA, without having yet set foot in the region, had become part of the Latin American cultural fabric. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this phenomenon was how it reversed the group's fortunes in the rest of the world. Massive success in Latin America, a market that in those years many considered secondary, caught the attention of US record companies, which began to promote ABBA with new energy. Suddenly, Fernando was playing on radio in New York and Los Angeles, and although he never reached #1 on Billboard, his constant presence helped cement the group's reputation as more than a passing European phenomenon. Internally, Fernando's success gave ABBA a new creative lease of life. The sessions for their next album, Arrival, unfolded with renewed confidence, producing hits like Dancing Queen and Knowing Me, Knowing You. Interestingly, it was also the beginning of a musical shift. The lyrics became more introspective, the melodies more complex. One could argue that Fernando marked the moment when ABBA stopped being simply a pop hit factory and became something deeper and more artistically ambitious. Years would pass, ABBA would break up, its members would go their separate ways, but Fernando's legacy in Latin America would only grow with time. When the ABBA Gold compilation was released in 1992, it was the Latin market that made it an unprecedented success, with Fernando as one of the most requested songs. The premiere of Mamma Mia in theaters in the region broke records, and to this day, any ABBA-related reunion or project generates massive media coverage in countries like Mexico or Argentina. In a final irony, that song that almost didn't exist, which had begun as a solo experiment by Frida in Swedish, ended up being not only the lifeline that kept ABBA afloat in their most difficult moments, but the bridge that connected them forever with millions of fans who didn't even speak their language. There is something deeply moving about how art can find its way into hearts in such unexpected ways. Fernando, with his unique blend of nostalgia, friendship, and melancholy, proved that good music transcends borders, languages, and circumstances, and that sometimes, when everything seems on the verge of collapse, a song can change everything. Today, almost 50 years later, when those first accordion chords sound on some Latin American radio, there are still those who close their eyes and let themselves be carried away by that magic that turned 4 Swedes into something so near and dear. Because in the end, beyond statistics and records, that is what makes a song great. Its ability to unite people from completely different worlds around the same emotion. And in that, Fernando has no rival. As always, if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe and leave your like. See you in the next video.